Welcome. Wednesday, July 19th, Architectural Heritage Board, Danville, Kentucky. Welcome you all. We've got a reasonably decent agenda this morning. First order of business is minutes from our previous meeting on June the 21st, 2017. If anyone's had a chance to review those, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Have a motion?
Second.
Have a second? Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Negative? We have those approved. Next order of business, certificate of appropriateness. And we have 218 West Broadway, Randy Bennett. And Randy, if you will step up and tell us what you have in mind, please.
All right, I am just wanting to renew a sign that's on 218 West Broadway to Southern Roots. It's just a blue sign. It has my name on it and then my number. I don't even know the dimensions at the moment. But it was Lily Manor, so I'm just trying to renew it to a new sign.
Want to tell us something about your business?
I'm a cosmetology, so it's a new hair salon. We're just coming from like another side of the town, and I've got a couple of girls coming with me, so I'm excited about it. And this is my first time owning this salon, so.
Great. Glad to have you downtown.
Yeah, I'm excited to be downtown.
Thank you for being down.
Yes.
Do that.
She's got great landlords, too.
That's a little iffy. I would have warned her about that if I could have talked to her beforehand, but we're teasing. This is on the record, but that's a tease. Has everyone had a chance to review this? You want to hit our points in K?
It does, the findings of fact finds it's appropriate.
We're essentially just
Right.
replacing same
Yeah.
sign, just new lettering, new colors, and
Yeah.
it should be good.
Yep,
All right, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make that.
Have a motion? Do I have a second? Have a second? Any further discussion? No? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No opposed? Thank you for
Thank
coming
you.
downtown. We
I appreciate it.
having your business,
Thank you.
even with the landlords you have.
I'm the better half.
You're the best, okay. Item number, 3. Discussion of the July 18th, 2014 Certificate of Appropriateness Center College parking lot at 5th and Main. And Mr. Leahy, I believe you're here. Let us know what our status is, please, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate it. I'm here on behalf of Center College. My name is Jamie Leahy, for the record. I think I know almost everybody here, at least. Vice President for Legal Affairs and Gift Planning. I'm also here from Center College with Kay Drake, our Vice President for Human Resources and Administrative Services. And I think, again, everybody knows us. I think we've both been here in this community at least 20 years, so we're almost locals now. Some of you will remember, some of you were on the board, I think, at the time. We were talking about this parking lot, the property on 5th Street. In June of 2014, this board approved a certificate of appropriateness for the parking lot. We had a design approved. I gave you, just prior to this meeting, I gave you a letter with some points in there, which I will cover during this, so I don't expect you to have read it before, but I just wanted to get something in the record, I guess. We have the parking lot with about 44 cars, I think, in there. Landscaping inside, lots of lighting, a substantial and pretty long brick wall along Main Street, decorative and attractive. We did have plans in the original plan to put a hedge along 5th Street as directed by this board and Ms. Lester. Since that time, we have become more concerned about what that would do, and particularly with safety concerns about the screening of the parking lot, which is the object of the design guideline. So I'll just read it aloud so everybody knows what I'm talking about. 3.0.6, if parking abuts a street, it should be screened from view by landscaping and/or a low brick wall. We've accomplished that on Main Street We did have it in our plans to do that on Fifth Street. We've become concerned about the safety aspects of having a screen of the parking lot on Fifth Street. And the points I've put there for you as we've looked at doing the planting over the last year, we're concerned about screening the visibility of the cars and the people inside the parking lot. If there's any kind of screening to be accomplished, it's going to keep people from seeing in. It's going to allow people to hide behind the bushes if they wish to do that. We don't want to have an additional risk of any kind of safety on our parking lot. And one of the things that I've pointed out is our parking lot, I think, is unique. I don't think there's another one exactly like it in the historic district, in that our cars tend to stay there overnight and for long periods of time. It's not like a business that closes at 8 o'clock at night or 5 o'clock in the evening and the cars disappear. Our cars sit there overnight, and the students who put them there during the school year may leave them there for weeks at a time without checking on them. That's an additional risk to theft and vandalism that they might not notice for quite a while. Also in conversations, as checking our own understanding of safety precautions, we did speak with Chief Gray and said, what do you think? Are we being unreasonable about this? And he said, I've got an additional concern about having the parking lot screened and people being able to hide in there, and our officers not being able to see in there as they drive by. We want to be able to see in there easily to see if somebody's in there. We feel the same way. Our public safety officers feel the same way. So that's why we feel that additional screening of the parking lot beyond what we have already accomplished is not appropriate for this particular parking lot. Not trying to undo the rule or say the rule is not appropriate, just don't think it's appropriate for our circumstance. We have substantial screening already. In our own internal conversations, we've said, well, maybe we could do like many of the other parking lots in the area and just put some low bushes down there. That doesn't seem like a terrible idea. It just doesn't accomplish anything. I think it would even look kind of odd to have this string. I mean, it's 250 feet of about a foot wide of grass. It just doesn't look like it would achieve anything aesthetically. The grass, the topsoil there is 3 inches deep because of what was there before. Not sure anything's going to grow there. It doesn't seem like it's going to accomplish anything, and the design guideline asks for a screening, not ornamental landscaping. So that's why we say we think we've got sufficient screening there already, which is why we have come to believe we do not desire to have any more screening, believe we have complied with the rule. If you believe that the rule would require additional screening, we ask you to provide an exception based on the unusual circumstance of our parking lot. And I did, using my terrific graphic design skills, give you a little photograph on the third page,
Okay.
using my own vehicle.
And we appreciate that. Your skills seem to be quite adequate.
I'm a college graduate.
I just have a couple
Sure.
points. I used to be involved in this many moons ago, as you know. The purpose of this also is to, and the library is a perfect case. There used to be a building there, and the screening is set to sort of leave a little bit of a memory of what used to be there. So along that grassy strip there, the purpose was A, to screen the parking lot, and the second is to sort of memorialize what used to be there. I know that sounds kind of corny, but that is the purpose of these brick walls, is you used to have a building there, and so we ask you to sort of put something back there. Would you be interested in putting a brick wall along there?
No, we wouldn't, and particularly that I don't think I even talked about my other point. In terms of creating that very narrow pedestrian chute, a brick wall, the brick wall we have there is about 1.5 feet wide. Okay. It's going to take up the entire space of that grass strip and probably be an even worse screen, but also creating that barrier. When cars are parked there along Fifth Street, they're not now, but during the school year, there'll be a solid wall of cars parked there. You've got a very narrow channel to put a lot of our students and some of our staff walk down there. So no, we don't desire to do a brick wall. Okay. And beyond that, we're ever hoping that some business will come along and want to use that. We don't want to own that forever, and we don't want to be a parking lot forever. So the less infrastructure we put there that will be torn down in a couple of years, we hope, we'd rather prefer not to do that.
What about an iron fence? I think, do you have a
Kind
fence?
of the same thing.
It looks like
our
you've got
brick,
some fencing on the front there.
it's on Main Street, yes. We
Yeah.
have substantial screening along the
There,
front.
you can see through it. It sort of leaves the memory of the building there.
It's again, it's a person barrier also.
Yeah.
One of the things we're concerned about, I hope you understand, we're concerned about the aesthetics as much as anybody. This is kind of the front part of our campus. This is why we invested so much of our resources in this corner. So we do care about that. But we're also concerned about what are we creating that causes safety hazards. I know it seems kind of silly, but we don't want to create a hazard. You've got parked cars and basically an iron fence or a brick wall.
Well, you could put some openings along there. I mean, that would be less money if you leave some openings. And I think there's a compromise to be found here that we still comply. And
Do you, well, I think we're already compliant with substantial screening.
on the Main Street side.
Not on Fifth Street.
But not on Fifth Street.
If I walk around downtown as I did the other day, and you see my little informal survey of 56 parking lots, I was amazed by that. I couldn't believe it.
Would you like to file a complaint on those?
No, of course
We can have
not.
our compliance
I'm not
officer check
complaining.
them.
No, I'm not complaining about that. I'm saying if we have a like level of screening,
You will find a lot of those downtown are government buildings that we have no regulation over.
there's a bank lot on the corner of 4th and Main which has no screening.
I find it difficult to
grandfathered in.
accept that
Yeah.
a strip of grass is aesthetically better than a 2-foot-high privet hedge, which would break up that visual corridor a little bit and would not obstruct vision into the lot. But it's just pretty stark the way it's been left. Plus, I believe that you agreed to put the privet hedge when we agreed to approve your original application.
And I think that's kind of a major point is in 2014, this was the agreement. And I think unless some of our members had questioned it, you would probably have never brought that back for an adjustment to this board. So it's like.
I guess we feel
you're
like
kinda
we've
asking
substantially
forgiveness
complied.
rather than permission.
Was this approved and is part of being able to tear the building down and move the buildings? Was this part of that
don't
agreement?
know.
I don't know.
Well, it's.
We had-
that
I
whole
It was a
thing.
later agreement, I believe.
I was here several times, I don't know.
Bridget, do you know?
It came up after they tore the building down. We denied the tearing the building down. They went to city commission, they approved them tearing it down, they tore it down. So then to put something back on that property, they had to come back to the board to
Okay.
approve that. This was a condition of what they could do on that property.
So tearing the building down wasn't because we need more parking?
No,
Okay.
no. They're doing the parking lot to help with the environmental problems there. If you cover that up,
That's the idea.
and they didn't have a specific use for it at the time. This was something that, I'm saying that incorrectly, let me know,
you're-
Jamie.
You're exactly right. And part of that factor is there's not going to be much able to grow there, again, without a substantial investment of more time and resources, watering, cutting, labor. It just doesn't seem to accomplish very much. If in the design guideline it asks for screening, and we're not actually screening, we're ornamenting, it actually seems to be a departure from the guideline, and it seems to not really accomplish very much. That's why we're asking
Yeah.
for you to agree that we have substantially complied with the guideline, there's unusual circumstances. I think, even a 2-foot hedge still gives somebody the opportunity to hide behind it. We'd rather not give anybody opportunity to do that. And in addition to that, and sort of complicating it, with all the cars there along Fifth Street, can't see it anyway.
Did the cars
Yeah.
come after this agreement?
I think
They
so.
They were just
Yeah,
recently,
parking was not
parking
allowed
was
before
recently
the
added.
Okay.
at-
It wasn't part of the thinking at the time.
Can we do away with the parking? Is it necessary?
You can
It
go
is
back and,
helpful in some respects.
you can ask for it to be removed. I can't say they can, but you can ask for that.
I'm just asking.
We're not here complaining about the
Okay.
parking. In fact, we had a role in asking for it. And here's why, not connected to this. I learned about this summer. Not connected to this. The idea for the parking on Fifth Street, again, accomplishing something else, to take some pressure off parking farther down the road, to provide a visual for people coming to the intersection of Broadway and Fifth to reinforce that it is a one-way and don't turn left, and the right turn off Main Street, if there's a line of cars there, which there is almost all the time during the school year, it does slow down traffic, rather than a quick zip around Main and onto Fifth Street, if there's a line of cars there. So there are some other safety concerns that were brought to bear there, that really don't have much to do with the parking lot.
So the same person who could hide behind the hedge can't hide behind the row of parked cars, correct?
Sure can.
Okay.
So we're desiring fewer of these visual screens.
Okay.
Not here complaining about the parked cars, it achieves some other things, but it compounds, I think, our concerns. So again, I think we have substantial screening from the parking lot. It's a lovely parking lot as they go.
We have, I think in the past, required Ephraim McDowell to comply with this and didn't want to, and we made them, is that right? Is that my
That
understanding?
was my understanding. I wasn't dealing with it
Yeah.
at that time, but that's my understanding, and they do have that wall
We did
there.
enforce this?
Yes.
They have a lot of parking lots in town with no
I think
screening.
the Sherwin-Williams lot, we
Okay.
requested compliance. There's been, I
And
can't
some of those are
recall.
mixed, Jamie, like they said. Some are grandfathered in, some were outside the district at the time. We expanded the district several years ago. I don't know which one of those fall into those, but anything that we've had recently, we've required, Ephraim McDowell over here with the where Boyle Land Lumber was, we required them to they put a fence up through there. We
They have a-
required them to.
They have a screen
there.
along 4th Street there, going to Martin Luther King. So there's a screen there.
Yeah, and then the one over here on Wall, whatever that building was, they screened that, so. But as I told Jamie when I checked with him, because y'all asking also, because to finish up making sure that COAs are completed and in compliance, that's why I contacted him. So I can't approve any changes. I told him he would have to come back and ask for your approval, so.
And that's why we ask for you to consider that we've done screening. We haven't done zero screening. We've done substantial screening. We have an unusual circumstance, which doesn't apply to, I think, any other parking lot in town. And I know as a responsible public institution, public body, you're going to think, okay, well, if we give this one, what about the next person coming in? I know that. I understand that. I would feel the same way. That's why I'm trying to say to you, the next person who comes in who doesn't have around-the-clock, a weeks-long parking lot with students who park there and leave their cars there, I don't know of anybody else who does that.
I think the Ephraim lot does. That is the doctor.
Not weeks at a time, but
employee lot.
overnight, yes, but not
Yeah.
weeks at a time.
It's not that relevant.
Further questions, further discussion? Do I have a motion of any sort? So for lack of a motion,
The requirement still stands,
requirement still stands.
so.
I would think that if we were presented something that's solved our problem, because our guidelines are designed not only to provide screening, but the visual, overall look of the area is also our concern. And I think a strip of grass is, and a lot of blacktop doesn't meet that criteria. And so if you have an alternative to a hedge,
I think we would entertain an alternative.
Oh, yeah.
Very readily.
For sure.
What do you want the alternative to accomplish, if not screening? Because that's the only thing provided for in the design guideline.
I like this iron rail that you have in the front. I think you can see through it. You can put openings. You could put some shrubs along your openings. I feel like that's a good compromise. It's a nice looking fence you've already put in. It matches what you did. But I don't want, you may have
It's a
some other
substantial
ideas.
expense. Mhm.
Well, sorry.
I think we died for lack of a motion.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bridget, if we can move to item number 4, which is the final draft of the historic overlay.
I'm coming for you for direction at this point, that you have the final draft of, that was provided by our contractor, Cultural Resource Analyst, and I've given you a copy of the excerpt from our ordinance. It tells you that our next step, unless you have any changes, would be to send this to Planning and Zoning and the City Commission for approval. And if that is where we are, then we talked yesterday with City Manager, we would set up a workshop sometime in August and start working, with the City Commission to discuss where we go with their comments and things like that. I think there may be some people who want to comment on the current draft, if you so choose to hear them this morning. And if not, and you're fine with everything ready to go, then the next step would be to take that on to I'll deliver those to planning and zoning and city commission, and then they can set up hearings, meetings, whatever, where they want to go from there. But
Okay.
those are the approvals we need to be able to start using these guidelines for our day-to-day activities and administration.
I'm open to comment. The rest of the board, are we okay? Sure. And I know I've heard from a couple of folks. Steve, would you?
I think Mary Robin would like to say something first.
Okay, Mary Robin, if you'll.
Maybe Patrick.
Patrick always will say something. He's good for a few words on something.
And while she's coming, these are on our website now. They've been put on our Facebook pages, all our groups and everything, to let them know that anyone who wants to look at those, they're out there.
Okay, my name is Mary Robin Spoonmore. I'm a resident and business owner in downtown Danville. The reason I wanted to speak is that I was foremost concerned about the language we keep speaking of that is not appropriate language. At the last meeting, I think there were 7 people that spoke of their concern about this, and then the final draft was rendered with the exact same language. And so my purpose isn't to mince words, but I think it's an important message about the way this is phrased about how we do business in Danville. So, acknowledging that you think and feel that this might be the best language, I'd like you to consider that it sort of does a disservice to our community to cast things like unnecessarily negative and ambiguous. I think perhaps a new person coming to town could look at the guidelines and be deterred right off the bat from their ideas and investments that could positively influence downtown. For example, they might want a facade alteration or have something in mind that could add to the vitality and interest of Main Street, for instance, and then they read that and then they go on to the next city. I would like to suggest perhaps we could say that such alterations, quote, will be carefully considered, weighing the effect of the alteration against the overall historical ambiance and the historical value of particular architectural elements. Like, to say will be considered rather than is not appropriate, I think is a much more positive way and reveals a much more positive orientation. And at the same time, you would still have the same power to deny requests that are not appropriate. So I think that's what I would like for you to consider is the insistence on this language and why you feel it necessary that language persists in the redraft of these guidelines. I'd like to just hear your comments on that.
Julie, would you like, I know we've discussed some of what the requirements are.
Yes, I think I addressed this on your comments on Facebook, that y'all knew I had a meeting with Bridget, with Vicki Bierenberg, who is the Kentucky Heritage Council. She approved the document as written. There are federal guidelines that we have to meet. Her comment was, when we discussed flexibility, that we do have more flexibility, but you are applying for a certificate of appropriateness, so it behooves us to explain what is appropriate and isn't appropriate, because that's what you're applying for. So basically what we're saying in this document is this isn't appropriate if you're applying for a certificate of appropriateness. And when she said that, we sort of went, well, yeah, I get that. But this is paid for by federal funds, and we have to comply and meet certain benchmarks. This document does that. So,
But did she say that changing the document to will be carefully considered would take it out of federal guidelines? Because I read the Department of Interior guidelines and they seem fairly loose, to be honest, and other.
you're not applying for a certificate of consideration. It's an appropriateness, so we have to say what is appropriate and what isn't, because that's what you're asking. When you modify a building under our guidelines, you have to know what the benchmark starting point is, and that's what this document does.
So the benchmark starting point for changing windows and facades is that it will, then is there no difference between the last document and this document? What is the benchmark starting point for changing windows, doors, and facades?
The last document said is not permitted.
Uh-huh.
There was no room.
It was, the last document was pretty concrete.
Yeah.
It was pretty black and white.
Yeah.
This document, as I read it, gives us some wiggle room to allow some of those things.
Right.
So you have no concern about perhaps deterring the creativity or revealing our community as not open, perhaps to creative investments, to certain growth because we say is not appropriate. That to me sounds like a closed door, a closed window, if we can use that metaphor, and not an open one. So I think it would be a service to our community to reveal itself as open to ideas, open to investment, open to a different tact.
I think the reinvestment statistics that the Heart of Danville tracks shows that we do encourage development. There's millions of dollars invested in downtown under the old guidelines. So I think we've loosened them. We comply with the federal guidelines. We have a starting point now to consider things that we never could before. And I think it'll only spur more development.
I just would have been curious if Vicki Burenberg, is that right? Or your state official, that is the only language she found compliant with the federal guidelines.
I don't know that. You'd have to call her.
Okay.
I can't
Well,
answer
then,
that for her.
so many people spoke about not wanting the secret code, the ambiguity, that's not a straightforward, transparent way to do business. So many people, no one spoke on the other side from the public. So I would like for that to go on public record, for that to be considered. And then, secondly, I think the interesting question is, so how are these guidelines going to be used differently than the other guidelines? The board had gone on and spoke about how they felt confined by the previous guidelines. But now, if these are loose guidelines and you don't really have to adhere to certain things, that's a different set. They have different meaning. And that's from conversations I had with Bridget yesterday and with Nick, and from what I understand you're saying, these guidelines, they're just guidelines. They're no longer the letter of the law. So I think it's important for us to say, are they just like guidelines and they're not really law? I mean, how are they going to be used? I think that's a really good question going forward. For our community,
I can only speak to what I think, and that is that we still have to oversee changes to the facades of these buildings, and they still have to meet certain standards. You're in a historic district. That's what makes Danville what it is. And so, yeah, we are going to still probably deny things and approve a lot more. That's just what we're here for.
And the ultimate goal is to codify them into some sort of city ordinance, which would be then the rule of law. But Bridget, would you like to?
We do have a historic district ordinance, an overlay, but, and there are things in there you can and you can't do, but they stipulate that we are to have guidelines to give us direction, to kind of guide you through the process. And this has been a learning process for all of us, you know. Like I told Mary Robin, I'm used to dealing with law and everything else. And starting with guidelines, as we've learned and evolved with education from the Heritage Council, we're learning through this process that these are guides and this is how to use them and make the best use of what we have, versus it tells you what to do, but it does give you some discretion in some areas, whereas law doesn't. A lot of times it's pretty black and white.
I think signage is a perfect example. If you were 21% of a sign size of your building linear feet, you couldn't put that sign up. Now, you can go up to what planning and zoning dictates. Planning and zoning is going to be the stricter standard. So if you're coming with a sign that's 23% of the window surface, we can approve that now, whereas we couldn't before. If it was 20 and a half, we couldn't approve it. So now, just using that area, as long as you meet planning and zoning, you're good for us. The murals is another. You couldn't put a mural up before, and now you're going to be able
Be
to
able to.
put public art on buildings, and that was a main goal of ours, was to allow
Yeah,
that.
that was a huge part of the
Right.
reasoning behind this.
We now address
And I think that
modern,
was something you had tried to do earlier, was the art aspect of some of your renovation there, that we couldn't permit before under these new guidelines. What you had asked for years ago, I think would be compliant. Now I'd have to look back.
as long as
What-
it's on a painted building.
Her
Yeah.
building's not, yeah, her building's not
Is
painted.
that, but, I just, so, all I know, in my experience and being denied certain things, the guidelines were treated as pretty much letter of the law, so it was, new to me that perhaps they're not anymore, they're just guidelines. Oh, well, do you see what I'm saying? So maybe I can expect a different approach, but I guess we should say that that's where we're going with this. Like what, because before, yeah, that's just the point, is that before you were confined and constrained by guidelines because they were treated as, quote, the law. And then now, I hear that they're just mere guidelines, so, I think if, we know, like as business owners and people that have ideas about changing downtown, what they are, then that will be most helpful. And that's all.
Thank you. Steve, Patrick?
I really am gonna be brief, because I said most of what I needed to say the last time. I wanted to follow up. First of all, Julie, I really appreciate that you all did do some of this on social media. I was a little reticent of that myself, because a lot of bad stuff happens on social media, but I thought it made a really good forum, and
I
people
think
could
it's been a
see.
good discussion.
I thought it worked really well. Your answer about the federal dollars in this grant, that grant specifically related to how we were going to pay for someone to assist in drafting new guidelines, right? Those dollars don't actually go to anything that puts paint on buildings. We'll assume we're talking about painted buildings, that kind of thing, right?
There could be grants down the road that,
There
Yeah,
could
but
be.
that-
That's going to be my follow-up
that
question, actually.
60% of funding does pay for that document and the consultant's time. So
Okay,
to
what's-
answer your question, yes. it
So
goes
what,
for
well, you
that
said
project.
60%. What's the other 40%?
City.
city.
Okay, so I guess then that does beg the next question, which is, okay, beyond that, I mean, that's good. We're going to get a grant to fund something in order to comply with the grant, but we haven't put a piece of mortar in a building. We haven't put a gutter on a building. We haven't done anything like that yet. What comes after that? And I guess the question becomes, I know that it's going to entitle us to other grants because we're compliant there. But does it disqualify us from grants completely, or are there grants we could get without doing this?
I don't know if I understand your question. You mean,
Okay, let me try again. You got one set of grants here that says, okay, you have to do X, Y, and Z. But you have a whole other set of grants from a different organization over here that says, well, we want A, B, and C. Is there some reason that we have to prefer one over the other?
You're talking about CLG.
Well, I'm getting there, yeah. It seems to me that there are grants that do not require this process, and I don't know does anybody have a value of what those are versus what we're talking about?
I think any federal money, you have to follow preservation standards. If you tear a bank down over here across the street, they're regulated by the Federal Deposit Insured, whatever that is, FDIC. The federal government has to review that project to make sure there's no adverse effect on the district. And if there is, then the bank has to pay mitigation funds for preservation efforts in the community. So any federal roads, federal buildings, any kind of housing that's federally regulated, there's a thing called Section 106, and that sort of makes sure that the government doesn't come in and tear down your historic fabric. So anything that's federally funded has to comply with federal preservation standards and guidelines. And if
Federally-
they don't, then you have to pay mitigation funds to further preservation in your community. Does that answer
Federally
your question?
funded because of the
Like the
FDIC.
parking structure, we had to, that's why we saved that facade of the Gilcher, is because we had to protect the integrity of that block because federal funds were involved. Medicare reimbursements are federal funds, so anything I mean, you think it's just a painting a facade, but it's so much.
No, that's not exactly the question I'm asking. I mean, let's take, for instance, because I think some people were probably surprised that the U.S. Bank building was actually in the guidelines we printed, because it's kind of an outlier with the rest of that block and the rest of downtown. And it's privately owned. Okay, theoretically, U.S. Bank leases it.
Right over here.
Yes,
Okay,
the old,
okay.
I guess it was
Yeah,
Bank of Danville at one
yeah.
point before they moved. That building is obviously I'm going to guess 75 years younger than everything around it.
Right.
It's a totally different design. And so the question that I would ask is, if somebody came and said, okay, I would like to put a facade on that building that looks like everything around it, do these guidelines provide for that? Remembering that the building that was there before, it did look like everything around it.
I'm not sure I can answer that. Without an application here, it's hard to speculate on what it would look like.
Well, let's
Any
assume that it,
answer would be speculative, and where you get into is, okay, what time period are you looking at? The 1860s, the 1890s, the 1910, 1940, 1950, 1970?
and I think that goes exactly to what Mary Robin was saying the last time. How do we define it? If we're assuming that the time period we're going for is the time that most of the buildings on Main Street were built following the Great Fire,
Yeah.
then one would say, okay, well, if you built something that looked like a mirror image of that, is that compliant if you wanted to do it? As I read these, I'm going to come to the guideline aspect first, it wouldn't be. And that concerns me a little bit. I think about, I said I wasn't going to do this. There's some buildings on Center's campus that were, frankly, Atchison Coel comes to mind, that were kind of thrown up when Center became co-ed as women's dorms. They were built very quickly. 50 years later, they said, well, let's put a Greek facade on them so that they match what's around them, which I believe had been their intention to begin with, but there wasn't time. And money. Would that be permitted under these guidelines? Well, I know you're not, I'm using examples, assuming they were in the historic overlay.
You
I'm
don't
gonna
want,
go
you
out
don't
on a
want to
limb
fake
here.
historic up a building. I mean, that's what Main Street 101 teaches you, is you don't want to go in and make a building look colonial if it's not. So you encourage them, again, to look more
And
modern.
I think this allows us, if it's enhancing
Right.
the
Right,
district.
the Center Library would be another
That's where
example.
the
That's
discretion comes in.
the Center Library, the old Young Science Hall. I mean, those have been tremendous
Those aren't
improvements in the
our
way.
district, so we can't really.
I'm using it by example, Julie.
Okay.
I'm saying, let's just assume that everything's in the district.
Hypothetical here.
Hypothetically,
Okay.
those have been tremendous improvements. I mean, there's been awards granted for those things. And I just would hope that we have the discretion to do that. Now, in terms, because somebody said, oh, is this the law? Do we have to go by the letter of the law?
Well, I think a recent example, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but Danville Law Group, when they redid their building, that was kind of a major change to that building, but it brought it into alignment with adjoining buildings. We approved that.
Okay.
So I think we have the latitude, I think,
Okay.
to do that. So I think that language is in there.
Okay. And I know on Mary Roberts Building, that's kind of a different deal. If I'm not mistaken, I think that's the only building around there that's not painted, isn't it, Bridget? I mean, all the ones on Main Street are. The rest of them going up that street are. The Danville Law Group is.
Yeah, I think so, but I could be wrong.
Okay, so.
I'd have to research, but in her case, I think we've discussed, there's like some vital screenings or such that can be attached to the building that would probably help her come in, do that, and be in compliance without painting the building.
Right.
And some of us will remember, I can't even remember what the business was. There was paint there at one point, but to come around to the idea of guidelines, what's a bright line rule and what's not? I guess I would, falling back on what's really in my wheelhouse, the federal sentencing guidelines several years ago had been believed by every federal judge in the country to be, this is what you got to do, this is what you got to do, this is what you got to do. Until the United States Supreme Court came in and said, no, by definition, guidelines are guidelines. They can be deviated. And so do you all feel like this language, and there's a whole section on flexibility. I was really glad to see that. Do you all have the right to deviate?
A lot more deviation or the ability to vary, to have a variance than we have at present time. I think it gives us a lot more latitude for that, Patrick.
Okay. And
Julie, do you agree to that?
I know, we want your projects to be
Yeah, we
approved.
do.
We want you to be.
And that's the big thing, and I know you all do. Again, Mary Robbins on point here. The issue isn't what the four of you all, or if there were six, think. The question is, what's going to happen when it's six new people 10 years down the road? Are they going to read that the same way?
But
I am hoping.
Can I answer that?
Well,
We're setting
okay.
the precedent. With the decisions that we make, that is the precedent for future applications. We're always going back and looking at what previous DAHB decisions are based on these guidelines. And so once we render a decision, that becomes sort of the precedent for future. So even though hopefully in 4 or 6 years, none of us are here anymore, our approving and being more flexible will become sort of the example for future.
And I hope you're right. Of course, you always have the
That's our
problem
goal.
if
I think that's
that
our
group
goal.
4 or 6 years from now comes back and looks at the precedents you set 2 years ago, then, they get influenced. I want to say this. I never got a chance to talk to Mr. Higgins, but I very much appreciate that section that specifically addresses flexibility. My main reason for even speaking today was to say, I hope it's not ink spilled on the page. I hope we don't get so caught up in the other details that we forget these are guidelines.
Yeah.
They
Now,
are
at least
not
Speaking
right.
for the present board, not future boards.
Right.
We were desirous of flexibility as the folks making the application, because there were a lot of times we saw a really cool project.
Right.
That we thought would benefit downtown tremendously, but we were backed into a corner. This gives us the ability to get out of most of those corners, we feel.
And I
Without-
definitely
without the city
appreciate
being
that.
sued.
I think Julie's example on the signs
Yeah.
is the easy one, because yes, I was aware of that problem, and that's when you enter the realm of the silly. So hopefully we've alleviated that one completely. I think everybody agrees there. So I really do appreciate it, and I know y'all have worked hard on this. Hopefully somewhere we have a memo that says, hey, we're not kidding about flexibility.
It's in the record, so it's in
We
the
definitely
record.
made a record now, and you're not going to make me look fat in the picture today, right now. So,
I don't know, he gave you that look, I'd stay behind the podium. He gave you that look, I'd stay behind the podium.
I think that covers me. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, sir, appreciate it. I thought you were headed for the podium. We-
I was going to come up and speak next, but I
W-
wanted
Would you like,
to be invited first.
Steve, you are invited,
Hi.
so please come forward.
Sorry for that grand entrance. My name is Steve Bottas, as you all know. I'm a resident here, and I'm a building owner. And before I get into some of the concurring points here on both sides, I do appreciate the work that you all are doing. But first and foremost, I ask for a motion for you all to delay approval of these guidelines as written until a full board is present, so that motions and whatnot can be addressed, that the public has made legitimate concerns over and should be appropriately addressed in the guidelines. So that's my hope from the words I may say right now that may have you all in some agreement with, and some may disapprove. But as I sat here and listened, wasn't prepared to talk about this, but it's, when you consider the certificates of appropriateness and listening to how things were addressed with our friends from Center on Fifth Street, it occurred to me that this is really the case in point. Exactly what Center is trying to demonstrate, what they're trying to do, what they have demonstrated to the community as a partner, as a community partner. When you fit, it's hard to fit exactly what Center did on Fifth Street into a specific guideline, because I think they had to go before the city board and commission to maybe get approval to buy or tear down that gas station that was there, and the parking lot that was part of that gas station, even behind there, the oil tanks, and then the row of houses that were decrepit and were a blight on that area, security risks and hazards. And I think if we remember appropriately, at least in my 20, 30-year memory, 40-year memory of that area, there was nothing real historic about that needed to be preserved or kept. So what Center did was really above and beyond, I think in full disclosure, saying we're not intending to have this be a parking lot forever. However, we want to do some nice things to it. We want to improve the workability and walkability for our students. We want to improve that corner for Danville and for Center. I think they did that with their screening with the brick wall and whatnot, and placard and some different things. But when you take that into account, they said, listen, when we first applied for these things, under these old guidelines, which, by the way, you should deny them, but not on certificates of appropriateness as filed, because you're saying that they filed this under the old guidelines that have not been approved yet, and that the new guidelines have much more flexibility to do these things. That's what we've been saying here. I don't see that with them, because they say, as they got into that, legitimately, they said, you know, and I think a point in reference to them, it was said as a counterpoint, well, you know, we want you to put something back there that is, you know, historical and closer to what was there. Well, think about what was there. They should put a couple oil tanks up, a couple broken down cars. I mean, if they really want to be serious about this. Otherwise, take into consideration, yeah, I can see how their plans have changed. I can see why. It's really from safety concerns. That's why a great degree of latitude should be given to them. Where is the latitude? I understood that these new guidelines are going to give you a great deal of latitude. So instead of getting into the minutia of the details right now, I ask that these guidelines as written be a few weeks, whatever it may be, until a full quorum is present, and that these legitimate concerns can be addressed appropriately. I think it would be a travesty to the community, taxpayer money and dollars, to be spent with this draft as written. I think it's getting close. I think you're definitely making headway, making lots of improvements. You have a new planning and zoning director coming in. They probably will have some input and some things they'd like to see, and I think those all should be considered, not indefinitely, but you know, a few weeks, whatever it may be, so that some of these legitimate concerns can be addressed in the right way. And I just think that Center's thing is an example of inflexibility. Who is to decide what is appropriate for them? I don't think that is the nature of what your board is intending to do. But it certainly seemed like that in that dialogue to me. So.
Steve, thank you. My first question, Bridget, do we have a quorum present today?
We do.
Do
Can
we?
I ask one other question from just to piggyback on that? Julie, the way that Vicki, I couldn't catch how you pronounce her last name.
Bierenberg.
Did she specifically say that the word appropriate had to be in there? We know that the word appropriate had to be in the certificate of appropriateness. But is there something, I'm thinking of a whole lot of ordinances that Jamie and I read over the years. I'm not sure that there's anything that says you have to use the word appropriate in the definition. Usually if you use the word in its own definition, it ceases to be a definition.
Well, that's our purpose here. The city has decided that's what they want us to do, is issue certificates of
No, I
appropriateness.
agree with that part. My question is, I mean, you've got 27 pages of what the definition is. Is there anything that says that you have to specifically say is not appropriate? Is there anything that ties you to that? I agree with what she said, the principle of what she
Yeah.
says. I am actually, I guess, asking about the minutia here. Did she say it has to use the word appropriate?
I don't know.
No, you don't have to, but there's an insistence on it that you can't get to, like,
Do you-
what's behind the insistence, except you keep going back to the argument, like, certificate of appropriateness, but
I'm done.
do we, it's the bigger picture, how we present ourselves as a community, to me.
So kind of as a builder and developer, you take into a lot of factors into a project. which way the sun comes up, which way it sets, which way you want the particular faces of spaces to be seen and attract light and different things that houses are different than buildings, but there's lots of things in when you do I've done a lot of historic renovations in Charlottesville, and I've got a pretty big renovation project here with the Wisiger. You take all these factors into consideration because you want to be able to also say, what do you want that space to be? What do you want to look? How do you want to act and feel? And then how do you fit that into some sort of guideline? That's what developers have to do, and I don't know, maybe you all have got a lot of experience building properties from concept to the final product. But there is no document or building says that when you begin a project that things don't change along the way. And as they change, you have to make adjustments. And I think it's appropriate to allow a great latitude in that adjustment because it affects budgets, it affects outcomes, it affects desirability of the property, it affects the community or the neighborhood in which it's in. It says, are we open? Are we really, really open for business and how we do things? Is that seen from DAHB all the way on through to the city, planning and zoning? Really, the greater thing is the big dollars that were spent on this strategic economic development plan. Does that fit into the greater economic development plan? Is DAHB acting in this manner, and the way I feel they're acting with Center as an example, is not fitting into the larger economic strategic plan that is being sought in this community. And that's what keeps Danville moving backward in my regard, not moving forward. So we could use this opportunity, and that's what it is, I'm trying to talk about opportunities, to really push the ball forward. So I really think it would be prudent to continue to go through these guidelines with a few more details, not rewrite the whole thing. Just fix some areas with everyone's willingness, everyone's agreement to do what's best for the community. Because it's not about us, it's not about me. Okay, guys, and you know that. It's about everyone else. And that's what we've got to consider here as the biggest factor.
Thank you.
I think the biggest challenge with these guidelines is just that, and it's hard because as a board, you have to look at each individual application on its own merit in conjunction with the guidelines. So we're trying to make guidelines that will address option out there that's going to come up. And so that is very challenging. So that's why it's called, you have to apply and you review each application based on its merits in conjunction with the whole district. So it's a very difficult task, and I have to commend this board for their hard work and stuff in trying to do this, but we're trying to do the best we can to come up with what will work for everybody in this process and still meet federal guidelines and requirements. This board is set up because the city commission has designated that in ordinance that we have this board, and that's what they're trying to do. Ultimately, there is a right of appeal to the city commission if you do not agree with the decision of this board. But we're not going to be able to write down every single thing in a book that's going to fix everything everybody wants to happen. We're doing the best that we can with that.
Well, you're speaking to me, right?
I'm
Basically.
speaking to the board, everybody, but
Okay.
yeah. But yet you're
Well,
welcome.
that's what we're asking, and we're not asking to rewrite everything.
But we may not be able to change, we may not change every bit of the language
Let's not
in
pass
there.
it and then go back to it and decide what's in it later. Let's go on and let's do a little more hard work on this before it gets brought up to the city commission so people don't have to go through an appeal
Well, we don't
process.
want that process to happen. I'm just saying that.
Then let's do the work.
But that can happen with anything that we do. If I give you a parking citation, you have the ability to appeal to a higher place from that, and even that's a totally different situation. There is legal processes set out and legal things set out, and we're trying to address everything that we can here.
I'm not hearing something here. I'm missing something.
And I'm talking, maybe I'm not making myself clear, but I'm just trying to say we're doing the best we can with
No,
all
it's
of
not
this, and we
saying
may not hit on every point that you want in there.
It's only one point that
That
we want to
doesn't
have
mean
cleared
that
up.
we are not going to do the best we can with the application and address that. But you have to look at each application and look at the whole set of guidelines and the district and all of that, and then this board has to say, is this appropriate for this area?
With all due respect, Bridget, you're using language that is in the new guidelines, which haven't been approved yet.
That's what I'm talking about. We're trying to make changes to get
But
to.
you made an opinion on a certificate of appropriateness earlier in this meeting based on old guidelines.
Well, those are the current guidelines we have, and they're also based on previous precedent, as Julie mentioned, precedent of what was approved for them to be able to do that project.
Right.
So we
And it
can't.
was clear that they said that
Well,
things had changed a little bit, and it gave really,
Just because
really
they've
very-
changed doesn't change the legal requirement that the board
What
has set
legal
out.
requirement
question.
did they overstep?
Do we have a certificate of appropriateness application on file with this information from Center that was signed by Center, saying this is what we want to do?
So.
Yes.
And
So
not-
hold on real
Not to
quick.
argue with you, Steve, but you're in the building business. If you have a contract with one of your vendors,
Yeah.
that vendor does not, and I'm not an expert on contractual law with the two attorneys that are here, but if that vendor does not comply with the contract,
It goes both ways, Mr. Ty. It goes both ways. Certificates of appropriateness and what is appropriate should go both ways. It's supposed to be collaborative between a builder and his client, and a client and the builder. If it's not, then the builder has to pick its clients a little more carefully, and vice versa. Okay? There is nothing that is set in stone, especially after a 4-year process, as Center did, case in point. And you get into projects and some of the smaller minutia and criteria changes. And those are what we are hoping that the new guidelines, they must give the latitude to allow the community to continue to prosper and grow. What I just saw and witnessed is the shutdown effect that I'm concerned about, that is going to seriously limit how Danville is perceived, how it is viewed, how it does business. So I'm trying to address the board. All due respect, Bridget, I don't want to be disrespectful, but
Well-
I'm not really having a discussion with you, I'm having a discussion with the
Right,
board.
right. Yes.
and thank you for your opinions.
And I was just trying to relay what we were trying to accomplish here. But again, I'm not pushing that you have to do anything with the guidelines at this point. My point was, we have the grant product. The next step is what's outlined in the ordinance. So I need direction from the board either today or in the future. If I don't get something to move forward today, it will just sit at my desk. So when you're ready for
Do I
those
have
to
a motion on these?
move forward, then we're ready to move forward. And I have a color copy of those guidelines. If anybody wants to see them, they're on our website as well. I did not print color copies for you because of the expense at this point. When they are finally approved, we'll have some of those available.
Yeah, no need to do that until we
So,
know
but
what the final.
we do have a couple color copies that were provided with as part of the grant.
If we move ahead, is our next step to go to P and Z?
The next step, I would send a memo with these to them and say what the ordinance says. Basically, we are awaiting your comments and approval so that we can put these in place and use these as our guidelines for the
So we could have
future.
comments back from planning and zoning? to
Well,
bring
we
them up.
could.
Okay.
It says, the guidelines shall be submitted to the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Commission for their approval. But, with that, they could make comments, and you can choose to change those or not, I guess, at that point. It depends on how they say it and what they say.
Bridget, do they review these for compliance against their regulations? Or are they going to be reviewing them for content?
Honestly, I don't know. The ordinance says the guidelines shall be submitted for their approval.
Okay,
So
just wondered.
it does say they shall include the Secretary of Interior standards. They may include other guidelines that apply to all designated, so on and so on in the ordinance, so.
Do I have a motion?
I think that these guidelines do meet the criteria of what we initially set out to do. With our objectives, those have been met, and we now have discretion to decide what is appropriate and what is not. And these finer points can't be legislated, in my view. And, you know, if people are not happy with our decisions, they can request our removal from the board, and they can do this.
I would assume there's still
So-
some discussion at planning and zoning and at city commission, correct, Bridget?
Well, like I said, in talking with the city manager, as far as the plan for the city commission would be to have a workshop on this, you know, and discussion and review, and, you know, they can ask questions and we can ask questions, and, or anyone can ask questions. It's a public hearing.
So this is kind of
kind
like
of
the
things.
first step of a process.
You know, we're the first step, and then it goes on from there. I mean, if we don't get approval for them, they're gonna sit where they are. They're not gonna be usable for any of us at this point, but,
And we'll
that's
have
the.
to stay with the old guidelines.
We will stay with, the old guidelines are in place, and they will not change unless we get approval from both those bodies for these. So if they don't approve them, then we just have a grant product. We've spent money for the guidelines, and that's what we have.
I'll make a motion that we approve these to go to planning and zoning, just to keep the process moving forward.
I have a motion, have a second. Further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So let's move them on to planning and zoning.
Tom, may I make one final comment, please? I'm sorry you've taken up enough of your time, I realize that. Has a public forum, public workshop been held for these guidelines?
We've had numerous conversations, at least
Okay.
two, maybe, I think three, but at least two.
Okay. I was suggesting a revote, please, to have one more public workshop. I think it's only fair. Agree to one more public workshop before it gets sent up the board, up the line.
I think that will occur with the city commission.
Well, now you're making it arduous, and I'm trying to remove that process because there's some legitimate concern that's not being addressed. It's been noted here, and you all are pushing things through anyway. So I just would ask you to reconsider.
I think on the point of order, we have a motion, it's been seconded and been voted on.
I do. I see where you're coming from.
But thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Bridget, any other business?
The only other just information I was just going to tell you, they will be coming back through the process. We've not received official written notification yet, but we are going to get our grants that we applied for this 2017 round to do the Wilderness Trail and the surveys. So that will be coming down in the next few weeks.
Bridget, do you want to talk about there's a change to the scope of that application, potential change?
Yeah, I'll let you
want me-
discuss
Okay.
that.
We had applied for Ruskin Art to do the online database of properties where you could go in and access all the information about the building. There's somebody in Kentucky named Phil Mink who is with UK, and he is creating a similar but probably better product for Kentucky. And so we are, Tom is shrinking here. We are going to, I think, consider going with Phil Mink, who is a local person. With this creation of this new program for Kentucky CLGs, Danville will have free access to it. We won't have to pay the subscription fee that we would have with Ruskin Art. He's going to create a similar product. We'll get membership to it for free. Saves us some money down the road, so.
Now, that will still have to be approved as an amendment to our application by the city commission,
Right.
but we were going to be taking that to them for approval at our, as soon as I get that document. We was hoping for Monday, but
Yeah.
anyway, I'll talk to Julie about that afterwards. But hopefully, we can get that documentation either on Monday's meeting or the first meeting in August to get everything moving, so then we'll be in the process of working on that. I'm also working with the city manager to get the information I need to go ahead and work towards contracting with a preservation person to help with a DAHB. So those things are in process as we're working
Is there
forward.
some possibility, there had been mentioned that might be covered under the new planning and zoning arrangement?
We originally talked about that, but we've since decided that won't work. So they don't meet they wouldn't meet the qualifications either.
Okay.
So we did get to meet Steve Hunter yesterday. He's been in for a couple days, so he's very excited and, excited to work with us and whatever we do. I mentioned to him the sign ordinance need to be reviewed, that would be coming down the pike for him because that's something that kept coming up in our stuff. So hopefully they'll be looking at that in the future.
Okay. One other question on my part. Do we have any members of the city commission present?
No, we
Can
do
we
not.
note that in the meeting
Okay.
minutes, please? Thank you.
Okay.
Any other business before the board?
And just to let you know, which we keep saying this, the 311 West Main is on track. They do have new owners. Tim Montgomery is the new owner, but they are working with codes enforcement, and they're on track.
I've seen
so
them back there doing demolition and carting away materials, so it's moving.
It's moving, so that's all I have.
Thank you, Tom. All right. Motion to adjourn? Motion from Julie. Second from Melanie. All in favor? Aye. Okay. Any opposed?